Okay, here we are back again, and Harry should be joining us any minute now. He's got the link, and we will his remarkable assessment of European politics, and for that matter of UK politics, far better than those who are totally close to it. I think. And just so you know, the news from overnight is that Macron has decided to call elections because his party was so badly trounced in the European elections. And I hope that Harry got the invite. I'll send it again just to be on the safe side. Make sure the electronics are behaving, and Harry has got the right link. Well, I mean, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to the Black Horse Pub. This is Mirador Television, and here he is, the one and only Harry Atterton. Good morning, Harry, again.
Good morning, Keith. Good morning. That beautiful backdrop you've got on the screen there, polling station, is that in Lewis?
No, it's not actually. It's not even from this year.
Well, there you go.
But we thought we wanted something indicative of the sort of things that we're talking about at the moment. On Mirador, although, as our good colleague John Henty says, he comes on in the morning and he hasn't a clue what the hell he's going to talk about, and all this is totally unscripted. But of course, there are some things which we are one would expect that we would talk about, and the European elections, Macron calling French elections, and I understand that the Germans have taken a bit of a tumble as far as their politics are concerned. And the one man who really can encapsulate all this is you.
Well, it's gone throughout Europe. Spain, Vox party in Spain have doubled their number of seats virtually. The same thing with the Austrians. The Austrians party, the Meloni in Italy has gone up. The AFD in Germany has come in second. The Schulz party came in third. That's, in other words, the governing party came in third. Just as in France, the presidential party came in a very poor second to the Rassemblement National, which is the right-wing party. Well, not so right-wing as it used to be. It's said to be extreme right, but it isn't. In fact, it's moved very much towards the center to gain respectability. So right across Europe, Holland is the same story in Holland. The center-right parties have increased their number of seats in the European Parliament. The European Parliament will still remain somewhat biased towards the left, towards the socialists, towards the Greens. Very strong representation of the Greens in the Socialist Parliament. That probably will lead to van der Leyen being re-elected. But the drift towards the right overall in Europe is quite amazing. And the reason why that affects Britain is because as Britain is moving to the left, and Starmer, I think, is quite sympathetic to Europe. I think he would want to sort of move closer to Europe. Well, that's going to make a very strange bedfellow for him because they're moving right. And if he wants to move towards them, he's going to have to become adopt a lot of right-wing thinking. And of course, Starmer is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He appears to be middle of the road, but if you look at what he was writing as a young barrister in these Trotskyite newspapers, he's an extreme left thinker, Starmer, and there's no getting away from that. He endorsed the Corbyn program wholeheartedly when Corbyn was there. So somebody not to be trusted. He's not as harmless as he looks, and so I think we've got to be careful there. But that's an interesting point, that how Starmer will cozy up to a Europe that's going definitely moving right. It's going to be an interesting political marriage if it ever happens. I don't know that Britain will go back into Europe. I do hope they don't, because Europe is on the way out. These are basically anti-European votes that have supported the right wings in the various European countries. Europe was an artificial construct in the first place, and I think it stays unnumbered. So I do hope that Britain, whichever party is in power in the following years, will not move back to Europe, because it's a dead end. It's a dead end, Europe.
Well, Harry, am I right in thinking that there is, in fact, much closer sympathy to a sort of a French Brexit than there used to be?
Oh, very much so. There's a strong French Frexit movement. It hasn't gone mainstream yet. The key player in there is Monsieur Asselineau, who is beginning to develop quite a following, and his argument is beginning to win through. There's a very strong sense of patriotism in France, and to have their national identity submerged under some sort of a false European construct is not at all what's in their mind. They're an intensely proud nation, and they are not naturally joiners into this cosmopolitan Europe.
Good morning again, Philip. Philip was with me a little earlier and wanted to rejoin so that he can chat to you. And I'm quite keen for him to chat to you, because the two of you make a very powerful pairing for getting our political views off to a very fine start on a Monday. So here we are.
Well, good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Philip. Good morning.
Keith and I have decided that you don't merely have a presence, you have a prescience.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Everything you've foreseen or forecast has come to pass. The only thing you didn't mention was that Macron has called an election.
Ah.
How do you interpret that? Is that a panic? Or is that a considered political move that he already had in mind?
It's a political ploy, and it's a very interesting one, insofar as Macron's party that catapulted him into the presidency no longer has a majority in what they call the L'Assemblée Nationale, which is the House of Commons. They don't have a majority. So they couldn't enact many of the laws that they wanted to, and they were having to push them through without a parliamentary vote. So he'd love to regain a majority in there. Now, his party came second in the European elections, a very poor second. They got only half of what the Rassemblement National got. And so he says, okay, that's the will of the people. I will dissolve parliament, will call elections, and in France, it's a two-stage election. The first phase, which is going to take place on the 30th of June, will most certainly result in the Rassemblement National, the right center-right party, coming through on top. But then there's a second phase a week later, on the 7th of July, when the last two competitors face off with each other, and all of the other parties will gang up on the Rassemblement National, and therefore his party will get a majority. So if this risk plays off, he will get a parliamentary majority back. So it's a very smart move on his part, because that's what his game plan is. Unless the right can consolidate and ensure that they push the RN through, the Rassemblement National through to a final victory, but it's not guaranteed, and so it could be a very smart political move on the part of Macron.
Yes, well, I shall watch with interest. Actually, the 30th of June is a Sunday, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have.
In fact, they do have parliament. Yeah, they normally vote on a Sunday in France. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ah, right.
Mm-hmm.
That I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
That I didn't know. Yeah. Well, it sounds like he's obviously thought this out.
Mm-hmm.
Not some knee-jerk reaction, but of course, the recent vote was for the European Parliament, wasn't it?
It was indeed, but it's because there's an anti-European movement right across Europe, and certainly there is in France. But it was also a means for the voter to complain against Macron. There's a very strong anti-Macron feeling in France. And what's going to happen is if he consolidates his position by this rather astute political move of dissolving the assembly, he's going to be hated even more. He's got a support of about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people, Macron, and that's not a healthy situation to be when the head of your nation is rejected by 80%, 90% of the people. So it's not healthy.
I find that extraordinary. It's a total contradiction in terms that you have a man in. Right, educate me a bit more. Macron is the president.
Mm-hmm.
What relevance? Let me try and phrase this correctly. The election you're talking about, the 2 stages,
Mm-hmm.
they are to elect what we call MPs. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same on the whatever in July, the 2nd phase.
Mm-hmm.
That again is about what you've called the House of Commons.
Yes, indeed. So let's understand the electoral system in France. It's a proportional system. It's not first past the post like we have in Britain. In the election we've just had, the European election, it's proportional. So they will get so many seats in the European Parliament depending on the proportion of votes that they got.
Yes.
Okay. Now then, what we're talking about now is a parliamentary election where they elect the Assemblée Nationale, and that is another type of election. That is a House of Commons election, as I say. The president is elected for 5 years. He's got another 3 years to run on this 2nd term. He can't run a 3rd term. You can't have a consecutive 3rd term president. However, another political possibility is that if his party doesn't get in, and you do get a Rassemblement National government led by this young man Bardella, he could resign as president. And then they'll appoint an interim president. And then when the next presidentials come up in 3 years' time, he could run again.
Right.
So he's a very smart cookie, this guy. He's got all kinds of possibilities. And he's only 46 years old, so he's got quite a future ahead of him. So I don't think we can write him off at all at this point. And bear in mind that France, while, as I said earlier, it's a very patriotic nation. They believe very strongly in the eternal France, la France éternelle, they are also very left-wing. They're still scarred by their revolution. Essentially, the center of politics in France is very much towards the left, which makes it a stretch of the imagination to think that even if the center right-wing party comes out ahead in the first round of the elections, the second runoff, everybody will gang up on them, and they just won't get in. I find it hard to think that we're going to end up with a right-wing government in France. It may happen, but I think Macron's bet, it's not a bad piece of political gambling that he's engaged in.
No, I understand now. Thank you, Harry. I mean, if the instinct of your average French person is left-wing,
Mm-hmm.
how is it, in your view, that Le Pen has gained so much success lately?
Well, two reasons. One, it's an anti-Macron vote. And the second one is that since the daughter, Marine Le Pen, separated from her father, who was extreme right in his views,
Yes.
she has brought the party back into the mainstream, back to the center. And because the Socialist Party in France has become more extreme, more of an immigrant party, the working class people feel excluded. They resent this massive immigration, just like the British do in France. There's a reaction against immigration, mass immigration in France, in England. And so she's become the party of the working class. Well, the working class is hardly right wing, so she's respectabilized her party and getting considerable support from. I won't say she's gone left wing. But she's very centrist now, so that explains the resurgence of that party. And they're doing extremely well, and they've got a lot of people believing in them. And since the true right-wing party in France has virtually disintegrated, they got about 7% of the vote on this election. You could call them the old Conservative Party in France. It just shows you what's likely to happen to the Conservatives in England. They're going to be marginalized to an extent that they probably won't exist as a political entity anymore of any importance. The Les Républicains, which is the old Conservative Party, which has been predominant in government ever since the war, apart from Mitterrand and others, they just barely exist anymore. Nobody listens to them. It's a forecast of what's going to happen to the Conservatives. And same reason, they were no longer conservatives. They were trying to be sort of thinly disguised socialists in many ways, at the very least centrists, and which explains the total rejection of the Conservatives by the British electorate. I don't think the Conservatives will recover for the same reasons. I think that just reflects what's happened in France for the traditional right-wing party.
So, just reverting to Britain again, do you think that the current so-called Tories will become as extinct as the old Liberal Party?
Oh, I do sincerely believe that. I think this, the Conservative Party is the oldest political party in Britain. Goes back, I think, to 1832, Disraeli and company. But they are no longer conservatives. And even the conservative base in the shires, the people who are true conservatives, people like me, I'm an ardent conservative thinker, but I reject completely the Parliamentary Conservative Party in Britain. And they will be rejected, and they've just made wets of themselves. They've carried out, why have we got the highest taxes, mass immigration, and all sorts of rules and regulations, stupid net zero policies? All of these things are not basically conservative thinking. It's nonsense. I mean, they've disintegrated before our eyes. Boris Johnson gives them an 80-seat majority, and here we are going to see them reduced to probably about 100 MPs, if they're lucky.
If they're lucky.
Yeah.
Even here in my blue as you'll ever get constituency, I think reform will do rather well.
Well, I hope they do well, and I hope that conservative thinkers, people who have conservative values, will back reform, because they're wasting their time backing the residue of the existing parliamentary Conservative Party, and particularly when, as a last act of betrayal, Sunak and company are parachuting their friends, their socialist conservative friends, into the so-called safe seats. So whatever survives, whatever rump party survives this massacre, they're the very people who've caused the problem. So we can't rebuild on them. The only possible way to rebuild conservative thought in Britain is to back reform. Reform are proposing a true conservative manifesto. If you read it, the main 10 points in it, not one of them could you argue against if you're a conservative. In fact, it's very difficult to argue against them if you weren't a conservative, because they're just common sense points of view. I believe that reform is just a name. The reform is the true Conservative Party in Britain, and we've got to get behind them.
The Times this evening, their headline is "Tories must embrace Farage," says Braverman.
Well, there you go.
The other disturbing front page was The Guardian, which we all know tends towards the left, where it said that Europe has moved with a surge of the extreme right, which is a sort of nonsense journalism that it's going to have to put up with in sort of people changing their views.
Well, there are two things there, Keith. First of all, the socialist rag like The Guardian, anything right of centre, they're going to label it as extreme.
Yes.
And these are not extreme parties. Well, a little bit extreme, I think, the AfD in Germany. They've said one or two silly things recently about all the SS people weren't that bad. I mean, that's a dumb thing to say on their part. So they're a little bit extreme, but Vox isn't extreme, and Wilders isn't extreme in Holland. And certainly, as I say, the Rassemblement National in France has moved to the center. It's become the Workers' Party. They are not the extreme right that's moving in. It's just a reaction against the stupidity of the extreme views, the ideological views embodied by the woke movement, by the Greens, by the stupidity of net zero. It's just a reaction. People have been voting against something for something. So this is not the extreme right that is resurging. It's common sense that's coming to the fore. And common sense is what you're going to find in the manifesto of Farage. Now, whether you like Farage or not, I'm not even sure whether I like him. But it's not a question of whether you should like people in politics. You've got to. People are going to enact your values, your views, what you think is good for the country. They're the people to vote for. You get on the bus as it goes by, or you miss the bus.
But is what I would describe rather scathingly as the middle class. They honestly believe that these parties are extreme, and when they're in their coffee shops with their tramps and their knitting and their proper way of life, 2 up, 2 down sort of thing, is they actually persuade themselves to this, and to me, that is a stumbling block for a move back to decent centre-right politics.
Well, this is the problem with politics generally, I think, all across the world. Very noticeable in North America, where there used to be an immense cooperation between the Republicans and the Democrats, cross-aisle agreements, all based on what was good for the nation. But now they've separated into ideological camps where never the twain shall meet. And that's what's happened. See that in America? The polarization of politics. And so you're seeing it also in Britain. We're going back into the old ideologies, and the way that the latter-day Conservative Party, Parliamentary Conservative Party, has sought to compensate for that, it's been drawn further and further into enacting the same kinds of policies. Can you really see the difference between the present Conservative Party and the Labour Party? I can't. He couldn't put a cigarette paper between them. They are not conservatives, and the conservatives in the shires, people like myself who hold strong conservative values, I want views and yes, values, want them out. We want them out. We want a cleaning. They've let us down. They've betrayed us. And we want to elect a proper Conservative Party. And there only is one option. The bus is going by, otherwise you're going to have 10 to 15 years of socialist rule, which is an ideological rule. And it is not, they believe in the individual, which is very noble, but if do not believe in the nation. They wouldn't defend the nation. I mean, do you think that people like Rayner and Starmer, who are on record of saying they want rid of nuclear weaponry, would ever push the button? And I'm not saying anybody should push the button, but if you say you're not going to push it, there are people who will push it, and there's plenty of them. There's the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians, and very soon the Iranians. They will let, and they'll just see this as a sign of weakness. They'll just walk all over us. And if we abandon Ukraine, who are fighting our war for us, we give them a few half-assed weapons now and then, but not the real stuff that they need. And once the Russians have conquered Ukraine, then Poland's next, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they're all goners, and they're going to be at our doorstep. Now, who's going to defend Britain? Who's going to think of the interest in Britain? They're more interested in what they getting a higher rate of pay for doing less in the union. I mean, it's ridiculous. These socialists care about people, which is wonderful. It's a lovely feeling, you know. But we've got to care about the nation, because only if the nation is healthy, only if the body is healthy, will the component parts of that body be able to function properly. We have a national interest to support. First and foremost, to have a healthy economy, to have sensible laws, rules and regulations that don't stifle economic advancement. And we're not going to get those under Labour, and we certainly weren't getting them under this so-called Conservative government. So we need change. We need major change, and the major change is represented by only one body of person at the moment, and that's the Reform Party. Think of them as
Harry, this is the leaflets we here in Arundel have received from the parliamentary candidate for Reform.
Mm-hmm.
He's a chap called David Thomas,
mm-hmm.
And it's a very detailed, double-sided document, which later on, if you like, I can email. I can scan it and email it to you.
I'd love to see it.
You'll find it very interesting because it makes perfect sense, and it's very, very detailed in its recommendations and what it promises. But its basic message is, as it puts it, for too long, traditional party allegiances and old political divides have failed to address the realities and challenges of our modern world. This is our opportunity to chart a new course. Reform UK stands as your beacon for real change, offering solutions that transcend past limitations. This is about more than a vote. It's about making a choice to actively shape a better future for our country. So seize this pivotal moment, embrace the chance to move beyond the status quo and contribute to a legacy of transformation. Well, I suspect you may agree with all of that, Harry.
Well, I agree with that as a statement of principle, but I have seen the 10 major points of the Reform Manifesto.
Have you?
Well, it hasn't been published yet, the manifesto, but the 10 major points that they support, and they're just common sense points to get rid of all of these artificial impediments to the success of Britain as a nation and for the good economic health of the people who live in it. So they're just common sense projects. That's a statement of philosophy, which I can, quite fully understand and agree with. But it's just the basic points. Do this, do that. But suggestions. There's no such series of points yet been issued by the Socialist Party. We don't know what their proposals are. The Lib Dems have just come out with their manifesto. They're the first ones to do it. The Tories haven't come out with a formal manifesto yet. What they're doing is they're anxiously trying to promise to do things that they should have done, in their tenure, in their 14-year tenure, which they didn't do. Nibbling at the edges, things like inheritance tax and what have you, which is an obscene thing. Can you imagine inheritance tax? People have been taxed and now they get taxed again when they're in their coffin. I mean, that's just scandalous, inheritance tax. And the
coffin they carry you off in.
Exactly. So they're wittering on about that. Soon I can company wittering on about that. What are they doing about it? Why don't they pass the law now? And then it's incumbent upon these socialists to undo that law if they dare, when they get into power, which they will be very shortly.
Well, as you will read when you receive this on an email scan, there's a few that strike me immediately. Under their social policies, combating extreme woke ideologies across government, NHS and social services, education, defence, we will realign spending away from divisive DEI initiatives, ensuring resources are dedicated to universally beneficial outcomes. Now, what's DEI?
How can you argue with that? I mean,
I'm agreeing with all of this. Can you help me with what DEI is?
Well, DEI is diversity, inclusion, and
right,
and all of this other nonsense. I mean, that's the kind of nonsense that's got us when we're selecting RAF fighter pilots. But they have to have so many different people from all the different minorities. Not how good a pilot is the guy. You can get a crackerjack pilot, but if the white Anglo-Saxon male brilliant pilot, his category is full. He's out of it, and they're going to get some other guy that from some other source. All these it's just unbelievable.
So that's how they selected their MPs.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how Parliament is made up.
And there are even laws to that effect in place at the moment. We're structured. We've got to get rid of all of that nonsense. But I come back to that point. I mean, it stunned me when I saw that absolutely brilliant fighter pilots were excluded from training because their category was already full. And it's not a question of, that's not racism. I don't care if all the fighter pilots in the RAF were black or transvestites or whatever. If they're good pilots, that's what we want. And there shouldn't be such a thing as DI, whatever you call it now, just the DVI, is it?
DEI.
DEI, well,
that's the initialization, DEI.
Yeah, I've got to get rid of that for a start. Get rid of this woke, get rid of net zero, get rid of all of these stupid rules and regulations which hamstring society, which work against the interest of the individual.
You conjured up, certainly in my fertile mind, the image of a cross-dressing fighter pilot. But there we are.
I'm afraid our own version of the inclusivity is we embrace our cleaner but just a little bit of noise competing with us at the moment. So forgive our wonderful guy who keeps the place clean and so on and so forth. He's a very nice guy, but he is on our side.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Right, Keith, get back in your box now.
Yeah.
Policing, recruiting 40,000 new officers, zero tolerance policies on crime, increasing stop and search powers to deter knife crime, constitutional reform, this is the bit I really like, leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and reforming the House of Lords to ensure a more democratic and accountable governing structure. British identity aims to affirm national sovereignty, oppose woke ideologies, and ensure that cultural heritage and values are preserved. Agreed?
Well, there you go. I mean, these are all common sense proposals. They're not even, in a sense, political proposals. They're the proper rules of the game. I don't know how anybody could be against that. Amazes me. The big problem is that we have given the decision making process over to unelected bodies and vested interest movements, so that our elected officials no longer have the ability to govern the nation. It's handed out to these quangos and have become forces in themselves. Um, the two biggest quangos, in a way, are the Bank of England and the Office for Budgetary Responsibility. These
Yes.
are very important organisms, but they should be serving the interests of the nation. And the people who are directing traffic are the people we elected. And if they don't do a good job, we kick them out of there. And so we can't kick the OBR out. The OBR is hell bent on mass immigration. The number of immigrants coming into Britain is decided behind closed doors by ministers. And if they decided to, Robert Jenrick, who should know is an ex-immigration minister, he resigned in order to express these points of view. He said that every time they try to reduce immigration into Britain, the OBR, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, threw up their hands in horror, saying, "Oh, you can't do that; it's going to hurt the economy." Well, what has mass immigration done? It has led to GDP per person going through the floor. It's created a whole series of cheap labor that has reduced the advances that could have been made in technology and automation, and it has created millions of British people who don't want to work and just live on benefits. That's what immigration has done. It's just totally distorted the economy. And yet the Office of Budgetary Responsibility is absolutely dedicated to mass immigration. So if a minister of immigration has to resign to fight against that, it just shows you how sick it is, having given power to all of these extra governmental bodies that are not elected but have decision-making authority in areas as important as that. The whole thing needs breaking down. We've abdicated responsibility. So politicians are just there to give speeches and do what they're unable to represent what the people need.
Well, what you're saying is undoubtedly the case. So that actually means that whoever is in Parliament is actually powerless.
Under the present structure, that's true. But you see, in the Reform Manifesto, they want government to take back control. They want the people who will to be in control. We elect the people to run the country on our behalf, and we put them in there. And so we want them to do the job we ask them to do according to the values that we espouse. And if they don't do that, we chase them out. But we can't chase these other people out. I mean, half of the decisions made in government are made by these non-elected bodies. They're the ones that are directing traffic, and you're going to get somebody like Rachel Reeves coming in now as Chancellor of the Exchequer. She is pure product of the Bank of England. She was an economist at the Bank of England. She is ideologically in that box as a prisoner. She cannot govern in the name of the people. She'll govern according to the values that were inculcated into her when she was in that when she was locked into that environment. It is a totally biased position that she takes into one of the most responsible roles in government. Bright lady, probably bright as hell, up brighter than I am, but absolutely unsuited for the task. You need somebody in there who is reflecting the interests of the British people.
Well, reform suggests as another social policy to reduce net migration by freezing non-essential immigration and implementing a robust plan to stop illegal crossings, which they foresee would save about £5 billion a year.
Well, indeed it would. I mean, everybody wants to stop the illegal crossings. How you do that is a question which can be debated, and we can talk about that. But before we get into details, because some of those details could be quite extreme, we've got to look at and say, what is the purpose of immigration? It is to bring cheap labor into the country. And many countries, Australia for many years, you had to have the point system where if you had certain qualities of skills that the nation needed, that got you in. If you didn't have them, you didn't get in. And you didn't get any benefits, by the way, for 5 years in Australia. You had to be there 5 years contributing before you could qualify for many of the services, medical care, or anything, you name it. Well, the second an illegal immigrant lands in Britain, he or she is given free medical care. I mean, because it's a nice thing to do. Well, isn't that wonderful? Why don't we invite the whole world and the British people? To hell with them. I mean, they're just left to their own devices. They're left to a national health system where a far greater number of people are dying in our Britain, waiting for attention and terminal illnesses than in virtually any other Western nation. In fact, I know of no other Western nation that has a failure rate in medical care as high as Britain's. So the proposal of reform, again, is to try and rework the NHS and put it into something similar to the French system, where it's a mix of private and public, where people pay at source in insurance, and the people who can't pay get covered. Nobody falls off the end, but you will get the major operations within a fraction of the time that before you get them in England. I mean, it's a scandal.
Harry, do you think? I totally understand your analysis. Do you think that no matter which political party is in power, that they will be able to wrest power from these quangos, from these cabinet offices, civil servants who have held it for so long and have entrenched themselves?
Well, if you wanted to reform the NHS, now this is where I'm getting into deep water, because I'm not an expert and I can't come up with the solutions. But isn't the very first stage to have a major study on the NHS and where it's going wrong? We instinctively get the feeling that it's top heavy in administration and rules and regulations about one thing and another. And the poor people on the front line that are working their backsides off, the nurses and the doctors, are just incidental. We've got to put the patient first, and then the people treating the patient, and the actual and administrative function into second, third, or fifth place, and get rid of half of these. It's right through the system. The civil service and it has grown, has doubled in the past. I don't know, very short period of time. I mean, what do we need all these people for? The number of civil servants in Britain are earning well over £100,000 a year. It's got, there's so many of them, you can't even count them.
Well, you're singing my song. I've ranted this past couple of weeks about the NHS because of my own personal experiences, and you are more or less reflecting exactly what I've been saying.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes,
I am speaking from experience. I spent Saturday in hospital from 6 in the morning. Well, I spent 2 hours in the ambulance ahead of time, from 4 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. In fact, 5 in the afternoon on Saturday. And as Philip knows, I'm in love with one of the nurses. But I mean, apart from that bias, is the actually frontline people are absolutely superb. The administrative people are just awful.
Mm-hmm. Well, once you get to the front line, you're okay. But getting there is and that's where most of the money goes. They're hiring diversity officers at 100,000 quid a year. I mean, for God's sake. You know, what we need is somebody to look after you when you're poorly. And the French system is very, very good. I can't speak too highly of the French system. You get attention and 5 minutes flat. It's right then if you really need it. Urgency is exactly that, urgent, and you're rushed in and you're looked after immediately. And now, in France, those people who can afford it pay an insurance for your medical. It's half of the medical system is free. Then you pay a top-up insurance. Now, if you can't pay that top-up insurance because of your economic position does not permit it, the government will accept that, and so you get it free anyway. And so it's just a form of taxation. And if you earn below a certain level, you don't even have to pay that top up. But the quality of the service, most of the money is spent on the frontline work. The doctors and the nurses and the hospitals. The hospitals are spotlessly clean. I mean, I'm not going to say it's a pleasure to go into a hospital, but it certainly isn't a pleasure to go into a British hospital. Not at the moment.
Well,
with the stretchers lined
none
up.
of what you just described would matter to Keith. His only concern would be, are the nurses cute? That's all that matters to him.
Well,
yes, I'm very surface.
That's valuable. That means the guy is still alive in his thoughts and
he's certainly alive
in his physical ambition. I mean, and so it would be. And no, I mean that's a natural human frailty to want a pretty nurse and handsome doctor and all the rest of it. Why not?
Well, Harry and Philip, I think that we're going to have plenty to talk about this week.
I think so.
And undoubtedly, all sorts of things are going to unfold. I see a concerted attack on Farage from all sides, and particularly from the Liberal with a little L. I'm not being political. From a little L, the attack on Farage. But strangely enough, he is now beginning to gain strength. And, you know, people are beginning to at long last say, what is this man saying? Instead of just a knee-jerk reaction.
Sure.
So we've got plenty to talk about. And I've got now a lady you love waiting in the wings, Harry. Liza has arrived and will be on in a minute or two.
Okay.
And Deck, as you can probably hear and see, is preparing like hell for his opening time of 12 o'clock. And we've actually been rabbiting on, believe it or not, for an hour.
Oh, really? So, well,
time goes very quickly when you're having fun, doesn't it?
Well, I should just disappear back into the French woodwork, as they say. But anyway, but I'm delighted to be with you. I've expressed some very strong views today, but that's because I have them, and I hope they come across as common sense views.
Yes. I mean, I don't want anybody holding back on their views on this program. I mean, as long as we don't approve of obscenity, and the only other thing is legally breaking copyright, is I take down all barriers, and I think that it's the only sensible, common sense way for us to have sensible and honest debate. Because if 3/4 of what you want to talk about is you're told that you can't talk about it because of sensitivity, what's the point in having debate?
Well, there you go. There you go. I mean, it's amazing. But my views, I hope, are not political. I am a conservative by nature, but I have totally discarded the way the Conservatives have been running the country. I don't want. I'm dreading the socialists getting in, and the Liberal Democrats. I mean, that's no. I want to remain polite in my questions.
Just say pinkos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am apolitical at the moment. I just want my country to be run by capable people.
Yes, but you have one major advantage over Keith and me. You don't have to live in this bloody country.
Well, I care about it so very deeply. I've lived abroad most of my life, but that has probably brought me closer to Britain than anywhere else because I've enjoyed and loved the places I've worked. I mean, it's numerous. I've counted.
Harry, you and I would share being a meritocrat. And, you know, in talking to people who supposedly are the intelligentsia and know how to run the country, is they sneer at meritocracy. And I've never understood why. And I think that the more we can actually espouse your philosophy, I want people running the country who know how the hell to run the country, the more people we can get onto that bandwagon, the better.
Well, I think you're right. And I hope... it's an up and down. Life is a series of ups and downs, and you've got to hit the bottom before you can pick yourself up again. Unfortunately, we tend not to learn from our mistakes. We condemn to repeat them throughout history. But we're about to make a. Are we about to make a big mistake? No, I think the price we have to pay to get rid of the useless socialist Tory party, parliamentary Tory party, is we're going to suffer 10 years of socialism. And it's going to be a terrible price we're going to pay with Starmer and his band. But we need to pay that price. We need to be, the body politic has to be operated on. The knife has got to go in. It's got to cut out the illness. And we've got to cut out the failure of the present government, and it's going to hurt, and the pain is going to come from 10 years of socialism. But we've got to go.
My rhetorical question of you both, to finalise, Keith, is Nigel Farage. What other politician or even aspiring politician would have had the courage to say that an Asian British Prime Minister did not understand the British culture?
Well,
and that's what he said.
Yes, but he's being accused of racism for that. But
inevitably, but
not
racism.
How do you? There's a wonderful analogy. Somebody asked why lawns in Britain can be so beautiful. You know, the typical British lawn, garden lawn, and the old guy says, "Well, I'll tell you." He said, "You smooth it all out, and you make it nice, and you sow your seeds, and you water it." And he said, "And you'll leave it for 800 years." That's why British lawns are what they are. You can't create instant patriotism. You can't create instant things. People are imbued with the values inculcated in them from their parents, from their sources, from their origins, from a changing society. Only if you have kept that basic concept of being British and it's in your blood, it's in your spirit, it's in your heart, it's in your mind. It's part of what you are. It's a component. Without it, you're not British. Well,
Yes.
you can't just suddenly become British because somebody gives you a British passport, or you go to a posh.
Actually, all you've got to do is to wade ashore at Dover.
You've got to wait for 800 years to become British.
Gentlemen, we're going to have plenty of discuss during the week. Thank you for being with me this morning. We're now going to give way to a beautiful lady who has been researching all sorts of stuff all week and can't wait to let the nation know what her results are.
So I give you this. I leave my space then and leave it to Beauty Before the Beast. I think is better.
Indeed,
Well, actually,
Harry.
it's Beauty After the Beast.
Okay, well, so I see you on Friday.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, God bless you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Harry.
Cheers.
Right. Okay. We're going to go away for 2 minutes, and then we're going to come back with Liza Page and her views on a whole variety of things. Boy, it is a stirring Monday morning this morning. Toodle pip.